Sixth type of function is a Signum function. Signum function. So as the name suggests, it has something to do with the sign of a number. So I'll tell you. This is the definition of a Signum function. I'll write it down. F of x would equal to 1 if x is greater than 0, 0 if x is equal to 0, and negative 1 if x is less than 0. So what it practically means is, if we give some number, it will return 1, 0 or negative 1 based on whether it is positive, 0 or negative 1. So I'll tell you. If we have example f of negative 3, we know negative 3 is less than 0, so we have to apply this condition. We can avoid these two conditions. Negative 3 is less than 0, so we have the output negative 1. So this is basically a constant function, but with 3 constants this time, and it's a piecewise function, so we have to base on this condition. If negative 3 is less than 0, which it is, then the output would be negative 1. This would show that it was a negative number. Alright, so the function basically just shows whether the input was a negative, positive or 0 number. So if we give 0, x is 0, we use this condition, which is 0. If we give f of 9, which is a positive 9, 9 is greater than 0, so we get 1. So there can be questions like, if f of x is equal to negative 1, what can you say about x? If f of x represents, if f is a Signum function, so what can you say about x? X would be a negative number, since negative numbers only give negative 1 as output for Signum functions. If we were to draw a graph, if this was x and this was y, for all numbers, for all positive numbers, the answer would be 1. For 0, it would be 0 itself. And for all negative numbers, the answer would be negative 1. Alright, so it's pretty simple. For all x greater than 0, the y value would be 1. For all values less than 0 for x-axis, the y value would be negative 1. And for 0, the y value would be 0 itself. So such questions can come, like I told. If f of x is 1, it means x is a positive number. If f of x is 0, it means the number was 0. And if f of x was negative 1, the number was negative. If it is given that f is a Signum function. Okay, pretty simple. And the domain here was R, and range would be only 3 numbers, negative 1, 0 or 1. Okay, greatest integer function. So I'll read out the definition first. Because greatest integer function takes a real number and returns the greatest integer less than or equal to the number. So for example, I'll write the how to represent GIF, or greatest integer function, or GIF, which would equal to square box x. This is how you represent the greatest integer function. And I'll tell you example. If f of 1.23, it's a decimal number. If we give a decimal number, f of 1.23, it basically rounds the number into an integer which is less than or equal to the number. So which integer is closest to 1.23, which is less than the number? It will be 1. So the answer would be 1. Even if we gave 1.96, it will not round it to 2, it will round it to the greatest integer less than or equal to number, so it will still be 1. Now if we give f of 2.01, the answer would be 2, since the least greatest integer would be 2 in this case. For negative numbers, let it not confuse you, negative 1.92. So in this case, we need the least greatest number which is less than or equal to a number. So it won't be -1 that will be greater than the number. It will be -2, right? Because for negative numbers, -2 is less than -1.92. So -2 would be the answer of for negative number. I'll do another one. F of -0.59. Here the answer would not be 0 because 0 is greater than -0.59. So the answer would be -1. Alright. So the function, so here I'll draw the graph f of, this is x-axis, this is y-axis, and we have a number 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3. For any number between 0 to 1 where 1 is not included, the answer would be 0, right? For any number from 1 to 2, the answer would be 1. For any number from 2 to 3, the answer would be 2. Where 3 is not included, 2 is not included, 1 is not. That's why it's the open circle. If it was a closed circle, 2 was included. But here it's not. And down also, it would be -1, -2. So for any number between -2 to -1, where -1 is not included, the answer would be -2. Okay. So the graph is pretty simple. It's like a stepwise ladder, sometimes called the ladder function. And here the domain is equal to R, and the range, can you guess the range? If domain is R, range will only be integers. Since the output is only integers, it won't give any decimal value. It will round it to the greatest integer less than or equal to the number. So suppose we put an integer itself into this function. If we put -1 itself, it will return -1 like an identity function, because it can return a integer less than or equal to that number. So if we give an integer, we get our integer back, but if we put a decimal number, it rounds it to the number less than or equal to that number. Okay, so that was the last of the types of functions. Now we can do some questions.